Olivia, welcome to the It's Not That Deep podcast.
What's up? Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited we were able to set this up.
I
Just
know.
giving people a little bit of an introduction. You're an actress, a model, influencer, blogger, and the co-host of the Whiskey and Water podcast. I'm so fired up to have you here. I mean, I know those are all like really cool titles and stuff, but like you're a genuinely awesome person. Like I don't even know you, but just from interacting with you on social media and consuming some of your podcast and just like our back and forth random like social media interactions, it's
hmm
like, man, she's cool. Like she's one of the good ones, you know. She doesn't have
Thank
too big of
you.
a too big of an ego, and like she's cool. I fuck with Olivia.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know it's been funny. I don't know if you found our page first, maybe through like hashtags or something, but since then, yeah, we've been like showing each other support here and there and just doing what we can to support our little shows.
100%. And we're definitely going to get into the podcast and, why you guys started it and all that. But let's take people back a little bit and into like what led to you being a quote unquote influencer, model, actress, and all these different things.
hmm
Let's talk about the modeling first. Like,
Sure.
yeah.
So I started when I was actually really young. Most people are kind of surprised to hear that I started when I was like 9. And then I kind of took a break, like in high school when I had braces. I went through like my awkward phase and I wasn't super comfortable like being in front of the camera. So I took a little break. And then after I graduated, got my braces off and I kind of like got my confidence back and I wanted to get more into it. And at the time, Instagram kind of just started and it definitely wasn't being used like how it is now. But, I kind of wanted to use it as like a modeling portfolio in a way because I felt weird sharing my modeling photos on like my personal Instagram. Just something about it just felt like kind of like show offy in a way. So I wanted
Mhm.
to create like a separate page, and that's the Olivia PW page. And then, yeah, things kind of just, went from there.
That's awesome. It's funny you mentioned that because like the beginning days of Instagram, I remember being on there too, and just like it was so different than what it is today.
So different.
Like people would just take photos of like the most random things. Like my first photo was like just a photo of a hat sitting on a desk.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
boom,
Mine
yeah.
was my school bag on top of my desk. And I was like, first Instagram photo.
It's like back then. I think Twitter and Facebook were kind of
Yeah,
dominating a little bit
for
more.
sure.
I was tweeting all the time, but even that's changed now. And like, but now
Yeah.
Instagram is very much like a showcase, and you
hmm
kind of, I guess, you kind of saw that before other people, and you're like, let me separate my personal from my modeling page,
Yeah.
and
I don't know what about it. I just, something in me was just like, the two should be separate in my mind, Like, I don't want to share pictures of me and like at the time my boyfriend and me, my friends, me, my family
yeah,
with the same photos of me like in a bathing suit, like showing my ass or modeling, like I don't know. It just like to put sexy photos next to like me and my, uncle. It's just weird. Like,
keep the two separate. I like that a
yeah,
lot.
like it made sense to me.
So you took like a break then from modeling in high school, got back into it, and so what was it that kind of like really sparked your interest in that world, in that space to begin with?
And modeling or Instagram?
Like the whole like not just modeling, but like creating your own like personal brand out of it.
So like I don't know, this whole thing of personal brand wasn't even like my intentions at first. Like it was really like I said just to have a separate place to show my modeling photos, kind of use it more as a portfolio. So, there was no feed aesthetic at the time. There was no like bloggers were really the blogging space was mostly in actual blogs instead of like on Instagram. So blogger influencer wasn't really a thing yet, but it kind of like as the app evolved, I evolved with it.
Hmm.
So, as the influencer opportunity started coming up, I realized that there was this opportunity. Honestly, at first, I saw it as an I saw it as an opportunity to get free shit. I was like, this
Nice.
girl has 60. Okay, so actually, my friend Erica Whedon is the one who really inspired me. I think she had like 60,000 at the time, which was a lot at the time. And I saw that she was getting free bathing suits. And I was like, I bet I want free bathing suits. You know, like that shit's expensive. What?
Sign me up.
Let me come up on this real quick. And then, so yeah, I kind of just started wanting to get free stuff. And I did for years before being able to actually like charge a brand for a post. But in the middle of that, I kind of found a way to build my own personal brand. And then, you know, now it's kind of you're selling a service almost to these brands. They're, instead of having a photo shoot for their product, they're budgeting their money into influencers with their own brand, with their own audience, and putting that money into them instead. It's really
Mhm.
interesting how it's all evolved.
Yeah, that is super interesting because as someone like for me outside looking in, because I am
Hmm.
absolutely nowhere near an influencer, and that's not that's not me. But
That's okay.
it's super cool looking at like a lot of these accounts and the people behind them and the type of posts that you guys are making, and it's changed so much from it used to just be like, and this is completely excuse my ignorance on this, but it used to just be like, you know, girls with big booties doing like gym photos and stuff like that.
Totally.
And like it has evolved, man. Like the girl with the gym booty now has a whole brand and a whole line of this and that, and like 10 other business ventures going on, and like this or that, like a YouTube channel. Like people have diversified, and so that was kind of like one of the things I wanted to ask you about was what are what are some of the things that you've had to do to adjust to a lot of the changes that we've seen on these social media platforms.
For sure. That's a good point because in the beginning it was all just like girls showing their asses and like, you know, that was like such a thing
Mind you,
back then.
even dudes, like super ripped dudes with like, the
Yeah,
perfect
just
chiseled body. Yeah,
flexing.
yeah, just flexing. Like, yeah,
For
like it
sure.
wasn't just girls, but yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
continue.
no, thank you for the disclaimer. Um, but and I kind of was in that batch too when I first started because I started doing a lot of bathing suit photo shoots when I got back into modeling. So a lot of my content was swimwear based, and especially being in Miami, like we're always on the beach, we're always, swimwear is a very prevalent business or industry down here. So, I was doing a lot of that, and then that ended up being the content that I was posting because it made sense. It's what I had, it's what I was doing. I was doing a lot of collaborations at the time for trade for bathing suits. So, and also at the time, you realize that it got better engagement. So you're like, oh, okay, well, if a photo of me in a bathing suit gets 500 more likes than a picture of me in clothes, then why not? I'm going to post the bathing suit photo.
Fair
But
enough.
as it evolved, like I mentioned, like as brands started paying, I did have to take into consideration, like, oh, okay, what do I want my personal brand to be? What are the values I want to represent? What do I want to offer brands and also my audience? Like, do I want my best service to be pictures of my body? And that just didn't sit right with me. So it was like literally a decision I had to make to be like, okay, I'm changing my brand. No more bathing suit photos, no more booty shots, like all lifestyle, all clothing. And for a long time, the engagement sucked because realistically, especially if you think about your following, if your following is mostly male, that's what they're gonna like. No offense. I'm just saying in general.
It's a fact.
It's like it's clickbaity. So I was kind of I just was willing to take the hit because one, in the end, it ends up being more profitable because the more lifestyle you are, the more attractable you are to clients like
Right.
Target or whatever it is. Target doesn't want to pay the girl with her ass out. Target wants
You're
to pay
more
the girl.
brand safe, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
more relatable, to other people. Um, but yeah, so I had to make those type of adjustments as far as just really taking a step back and thinking like, okay, how do I want to really represent myself to the world of the internet, because it is a whole different world.
So is it safe to say that's kind of what led you to pivot a little bit into the more blogging lifestyle, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And also it's like, you have to have multiple streams of things. You have to, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. So I started my blog like 3 years ago, maybe a little over 3 years ago. I'm honestly not super active on it. I'm not posting a blog a month, maybe one every few months, but I like that I have it there. Just as a space, if I do want to write about something, I have that option.
Right.
Or even for brands, like that's another thing I can kind of use to market myself. Hey, I have an Instagram and a blog and a
Hmm.
podcast. So it's kind of just like looking at it from a business standpoint, but
Right.
also like how I want to express myself creatively, because you can only get so deep in an Instagram caption.
Exactly. Even though it's not that deep, right?
Even though it's not that deep, we still want to
I
get
do.
deep sometimes.
Sometimes it is that deep. No,
There's
that's
a
a
time and a
really
place.
there's a really interesting thing that you said there about having the blog as a creative outlet, that not only serves like your audience, which obviously it does, but it helps you too, and like crystallize your thoughts and get things out there that you want to put out there. But I think the issue can be sometimes going to start something like a blog or something like that, and then, oh my god, this is a lot of work, like I don't want to do this every week, or like
Yeah,
some people do it like every day, like I don't know how people do that. But
I don't know
i
either.
started one i started one naively on my website for my podcast, thinking, oh yeah, you know what, like how hard is it going to be to, like, if I'm already putting out a weekly podcast, how hard is it going to be to do a blog? Yo sis, I got 2 posts.
Yeah.
I gave up so
It
quick.
be like that. It be like that though, for sure.
It
And it's
was
hard because writing is hard. Like it's
it
not an
is.
easy thing, and especially if you're not like consistently practicing, and I'm like, somewhat of a perfectionist, so everything that I put out on my blog, I would have my mom proofread and edit, and then I'd edit it like 2 more times, and then I'd post it and then edit it again. So it's hard to be like kind of a perfectionist and put your work out there, because you don't want to put garbage out there. You want it to be well thought out and well written, and you're representing yourself and your brand. So I,
Absolutely.
I agree. It's tough. That's why I don't. I like to, like, when I go on trips, like when I have something motivating enough, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write about this on my blog.
It's like so many of those things that we tell ourselves we want to do a lot more of, like, I want to journal every day, I want to do this, I want to meditate, I want to blah blah blah, all the, like, a million things. And
Hmm.
even like I even, like, I do a lot of those things, but even some days I'm just like, bro, it's just too much. I'm just like, I
Yeah, I
can't.
know. I
There's just too
know.
many things.
And there's something to be said about, kind of just like appreciating that we're human, and like not. And I think that, especially in this time right now where we're being forced to slow down and
Yeah.
forced to stay inside and like really have very minimal distractions, other than the World Wide Web, which is a huge distraction. But other than that, like, I think it's a good challenge for us to either A, get to those things that we've been saying we wanted to do, or B, not push ourselves to be like so productive and so busy and so goal oriented, and to just like chill the fuck out.
You bring up like a really good thing that I've been like battling with over this weird strange time that we've been kind of confined to our homes and on lockdown. um like, one side of me is very much driven by achieving goals and just leveling up every day and just being
Mhm.
being a better version of myself when I go to bed than when I woke up. That's
Mhm.
like that's very important to me because I'm a big believer in personal development and growth. And I can even almost sometimes come off too much in that, like, sense, like
Mhm.
guys, like, be better, not in like a
Right.
condescending way, but it's just like,
I want better for you.
I want better for you
Yeah.
because
And I
I
know it's
know
possible.
exactly, you get
Yeah.
me. So, like, there's that, and then but then there's also the message of, hey man, We're just human, just chill. Like I have not been nearly as productive as I normally am. Like before this virus,
Mm-hmm.
I usually work out 5, 6 times a week. These days, I'm like, I'm happy if I get 3 or 4 in a week. I'm
Mm-hmm.
it's just the motivation's not there, and that's
Yeah.
just one aspect, right? And so it's like it's very much playing with that dichotomy that okay, like you know what, like try to be better, try to do better, but not at the cost of your own mental health and things like that.
Yeah, and not judging yourself, you know.
That's a big one.
Yeah, so like the episode that we just came out with this week was actually like a lot about this kind of because especially online I think there's two narratives we're seeing right now. One side is like start that side hustle, start that podcast, you know, read that book or start writing that book. And then the other side is like don't make yourself a project in the middle of a global pandemic. Like now is not the time for that. Just stay
Hmm.
healthy and stay sane and like don't put this pressure on yourself. And I think it's a balance of both. And I truly do feel both deeply. I'm not pressuring myself to get things done. But that's a challenge. Like it's not people who are naturally goal oriented and driven, as I think both of us are, we thrive off of checking things off our to-do list. Like that makes us feel good. So
1,000%.
to challenge that within ourselves is not easy, but I think it's a good challenge, you know? And like what
Yeah.
makes you uncomfortable is your biggest opportunity for growth, right? So it's like, all right, here we go. We're about to like flip the switch on everything we know about ourselves and, you know, what we consider happiness and success and fulfillment, you know?
Right. No,
It's
I'm
interesting.
with you. I'm with you 1,000%. And yeah, I actually started listening to that episode, but I didn't get through it. And I think it's really like that. It's a really important topic right now, and I don't have the answer like most people. I like there's no answer to this question. It's
Yeah,
very much something that you got to try to harmonize with whatever you got going on. To
right.
me
It's not a
personally,
one size fits all.
exactly. To me personally, when I hear messages of complacence, of hey, like overly compassionate posts and things like that, like hey, it's okay like to just lay down and watch Netflix all day, it's okay to do this, that does the opposite for me. I feel worse and I go
Right.
down into a deeper rabbit hole of like negativity, and that feedback
Mm-hmm.
loop is so I hate when I go down that hole
Right.
because it leaks into every area of my life and it's so
Mm-hmm.
much harder to pull myself back out. But that's me. I can't
Right.
apply that to everybody else. For some people, that day of like just Netflix and doing nothing might be like the thing that saved them from doing something
Right.
else self sabotaging. So I don't know, like you can't just
It's
give a
hard.
cookie cutter solution.
It's hard and but it's about like using this time to learn more about yourself and how you work. So that was kind of the conclusion we came to in this episode, which by the way, we had to record twice because the first time it's hard to talk about what's happening, you know? And we didn't realize until we tried and we were like cuz it's hard to one it's hard to wrap your mind around what's happening right now. And then two it's
Yeah.
hard to have like a productive conversation about it. So yeah, anyways, I digress. What was I saying?
No, we were just basically talking
Oh,
about COVID and yeah,
yeah.
like
So what the point we got to is that like, you know, maybe now is not the time to make start the side hustle or the book or the podcast, but now definitely is the time to work on personal development. Like this is actually a great opportunity to use this time to work on personal development. You can't leave. You're stuck inside and there's so much to be worked on within ourselves that I think people are blind to. I don't know. It's but now's the time,
I think people are scared of being alone with their own thoughts. And
which is fair. It's a scary place
it is a scary place, and I'm not claiming to be some kind of expert or some like Buddhist monk who has it like nailed down. Like
altogether. Yeah.
you just have to sit down and do nothing for like I can meditate for 10 minutes. That's about it. After that I'm like, all right, we're done. This is
Yeah.
it.
Hey, it's better
That's
than
as much
nothing. There you go.
that's as much exploration into the self as I need, right? But to
But
each
you are
their
self aware.
right. I'd say that I am, but it's very much I wasn't always like this. You see,
Mm-hmm.
I was in a very dark place myself many years ago when I would self sabotage by doing things that would just plunge me deeper into a bad place. I would go like just keep distracting myself with the Netflix. I would like drink like I would drink alcohol and like go out with friends and just like ignore whatever issue that I'm dealing with and just push it further down the road. I like, I'd grab that 2 a.m. McDonald's on the way home from an
Mm-hmm.
exam or something. Like those were destructive habits, right? But very much a work in progress.
What do you
Yeah.
think changed for you?
I think a big thing for me was realizing that you are in a lot more control than society might lead you to believe. And I think like I love that you're such a podcaster, just like flipping the script on me.
It's
So dope, so dope, so
habit.
dope, so dope. But no, like to quickly answer that, like I think the big thing was realizing that okay, you are in the driver's seat. Even though it feels like things around you are out of control and everything is happening to you, things are just happening. And how you respond to them is a lot more important than how you let those things define you and create your identity out of those things. So
Totally.
that was a big shift for me, and like I've been able to control many aspects of my life, but the takeaway there shouldn't be that you need control. It should be actually that like realizing that you have control over how you respond to things, but you actually have no control over anything at all. It's kind of like a paradox in
Mm-hmm.
that sense. Like we don't
Well,
have
you
control
always
over
have
this
control
virus.
over you. Yeah, right. But you always have control over your reaction and your.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was watching a what was it, BuzzFeed video of this guy, and I mentioned it in this episode too, and he was just saying a bunch of analogies that were really great. But he was saying that life is birth and then it's BCD: birth, choice, death. The choices you make in your life are everything. Every
That
choice you
is
make in
life.
life
Yeah.
is going to determine how your life ends up before you
Yeah.
die. So it's like, there are a lot of things in our hands, as much as there is out of our hands, like a global pandemic. How you choose to react and how
Mhm.
you choose to spend your days and your time is totally in your control.
Very much so. I love this topic, and it's like a big part of my podcast personally is, um, you know, leveling up in those kinds of ways. And I know it sounds so cliche, like, you know, go do more, be more, grow more, like get bigger, better, faster, stronger. Like yes, but also do it in a way that works for you. That's why no self-help book, no like no YouTube video, no podcast is going to solve your problems for you. It's very much having that conversation with yourself. And I,
Mm-hmm.
weren't you reading this book recently? I think I saw you post something about it, like Meditations or something it was called.
Meditations. It's
It was like this
the
blue cover book. I don't know what you, it was like,
blue
I don't know. I don't know. I saw you post a story about it.
recently.
And yeah, pretty recently, like this book.
Okay, it's the power of the healing mind, I think.
That one.
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
wild.
gotta, I gotta add that to my list, but you know,
It's very spiritual. So I don't know
right.
how deep you are into that or how many if you've read any books about that, but just a fair warning.
Fair enough. I mean, like, I just like to add these things to my repertoire, but even
For
that, for
sure.
example, like, that won't be the be all end all if you read a book and you're like, okay, yeah, this helps me a lot. You pick and choose the things that are, you're going to be able to take away and apply to your life. So I don't know why I've gone off on this crazy tangent. Let's go back and talk about you for a second.
No,
Um,
you're good. I love it. I love it.
let's talk about the podcast, and because we kind of started to mention it a little bit, but earlier last year you started a podcast with your friend. Would it be your best friend? I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
mislabeling. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
nope. She's my best friend.
Okay, you and your best friend started this podcast. Why don't you talk
hmm
about like what led up to you guys deciding, yo, we need a podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a podcast called Whiskey and Water Podcast. It is kind of turned into a personal development for millennials.
Nice.
podcast. And actually someone else labeled it that for us, and we were like, I like that, because it is pretty accurate. It's kind of like a mix between entertainment and inspiration, hence the balance of whiskey and water. Also, Jessica, her drink of choice is whiskey, and I'm allergic to alcohol, so I only drink water. So there's a few little
I
reasons
like
there.
that.
But yeah, it's a balance of, the shit show that we go through, and modeling and influencing, and just being young 20-year-old women, just experiencing and going through life, and learning as we go. But also a lot of personal development, spirituality, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's kind of like, that's a broad overview of it. What got us started is kind of, we had been friends for like 4 years already. We met through modeling. We started influencing kind of together. We were constantly shooting content together. We're kind of like, we're just each other's go-tos for content, for projects, collaborations. Like, we just do everything together.
Right.
So we already worked together in that aspect. And then, we actually had the idea like a year before we made it happen, because I was a little hesitant. I kind of just put it on the back burner. I don't know if it was that I wasn't confident that we could do it, or if it kind of just scared me. But we let it sit there for like a year, the idea. And then it really came from like me just knowing how much value I was getting out of other podcasts. At the time, I was listening to a big real estate investing podcast called Bigger Pockets,
Mm.
and a lot of motivational podcasts. And I saw how much I grew within a year or two just from podcasts alone, and how it was changing the way I lived my life, how I reacted to situations, how I, handled the relationships in my life. It was just, I could see the growth. And I felt like I wanted to give that back in some aspect to people who haven't, joined the podcast world. Because I've been like, ask my friends, like, even before we started ours, I've been preaching podcasts for years. So I don't know, finally got to a point where I just felt like I had enough value that I could sit and talk to someone, Jessica, for an hour, and just provide these insights and concepts and different ways of looking at situations in life to someone else, and that they would benefit from it. So once I realized that I could have some real influence on my audience,
Hmm.
and really be able to possibly change the course of people's lives, because like, that's what the podcast I listen to, that's what those people did for me. And I felt like I finally could do that for someone else, and that's what lit the fire under our ass. And we were like, you know what, let's fucking do it.
I'm so glad you did too, because it's actually a fire podcast. I've listened to a few episodes myself, and
Thank
like
you.
it's just like it provides tremendous value. All those things you've talked about. I know a lot of people who are gonna listen to this one today and are gonna find your podcast and gonna just ride with it, because it just
Yes.
it just speaks to probably more the like the women, um
Female, definitely.
female category a little bit more, because you guys are very open and candid and having these discussions about the things that you've gone through, and it's like it's a really well done podcast. And
Thank you. That means a
I
lot.
can't
Thank you.
I can't believe that it's like still so early in your guys' like podcast careers, because seems like you guys are like seasoned vets. But one thing like you really said there that I can personally relate with too hard. It sounded like I was telling that story in my head, because like legit same thing. I was riding with podcasts so hard before I ever even thought about having one and starting one, and just the value that I had gotten in my life. And I had mentioned earlier that I was not in the best place, like back when I was
Mm-hmm.
in university. uh, the podcasts were one of the things that kind of like I credit to kind of saving my life. And it's
Totally.
it's because like you're able to be a fly on the wall on some of these conversations with
Yep.
people who
That's what
are
I always
just,
say.
yeah, exactly, experts in their field. And you're basically,
Billionaires.
exactly,
Of
you're
like the biggest companies in the world. And
the biggest.
this is what I would always say, and I mentioned this in the personal development episode. Like, imagine the finessing you would have to do to try to get in a room with some of these people. And there's a free app on your phone that you
Yeah.
can eavesdrop on a conversation and ask them these questions that you would just die to ask, and
Right.
it's a free resource. Like,
And from
why
anybody
would you
you
not
want to
use
learn
it?
from. Exactly. And it's like, it's
It's like a
literally,
no-brainer.
it doesn't make sense to me why you wouldn't consume podcasts if you're trying to learn or be entertained, or even like, I don't know, there's like mini casts now, so people do podcasts alone, people do like, there's so many different formats of it now. But when I started, it was just basically this format right here, just an exchange of ideas, just two people talking, asking each other questions, having a conversation,
Mhm.
and everyone listening downloading this experience and learning from your life experience, and like, oh my god, like she did that too, or like, oh, I can't relate to that at all, but like, still you're taking
You're
something
gonna get
away.
something valuable out of it.
Exactly. And like you said, it's free. Like, it's just, it doesn't make
It's a
sense.
beautiful, beautiful thing. Like, I feel so thankful to live in this day and age where there's just so many resources for us, and it's really, you'd be surprised. People are really, really open and willing to share their secrets to success, how they got there, their failures. Like, people are willing to share this knowledge. I think it's just innate in us as humans to want to give back in some sort of way, and a lot of people feel like they can give back in their knowledge and their biggest fuck ups that they don't want you to make, a complete stranger. It's beautiful.
It is, like, that's the best way to put it. It's just beautiful. I love podcasting, but let's talk about taking that plunge. You mentioned, it took you almost a year to get started, and I can relate with that as well. It took me about a year from when I had thought about it and kind of, you know, eh, put the idea out there with a couple friends, like, hey, what do you think of, and like
Hmm.
getting that overwhelming support and like, you should do this. Going
Yeah.
from that to actually purchasing your first piece of equipment, what was the like, okay, like, we have to do this now?
Um, we kind of, I think we had the idea for like a year. We were talking about it, and I think we had just come back from a trip in LA, and just like with it in the back of our minds and living throughout situations of our life, we were like, ooh, that's something we could talk about. Ooh, that's a good topic. Ooh, so like it was a bunch of those
Yeah.
moments added up, and then we like came home from a trip, I think it was. I think we came home from a trip and we were like, okay, this week
It's
we're
time.
sitting down, we're talking names, like just names, right? Let's just word vomit. Let's just do a mind thought exercise, and let's
Yeah.
just see what it would be, what we would talk about, what type of guests we would want. So we really experimented with like ideas like that first. And then once we like got the name and got the concept, we were just like fired up. And we were like, let's do this. We found our producer, Zach, who has been so amazing. We could not, it was the three of us, and now we have an editor, Lucas, who, it's a small little team, but we're a well-oiled machine now. But Zach really, like, as our producer, he came in and helped so much with the technical aspects of it,
Yeah.
because a lot of podcasts are only audio, and like we were mentioning earlier, to have this video to offer the world and to guests even is like really a great way to make you stand out, one, and
Yeah.
just a better and something else you can offer your audience. So he really helped in that aspect, and it's so funny because I still remember me and Jess being like, I still remember like before we made our cover art and before we recorded our first episode, just being so excited to finally see like our podcast on the app. Like I felt like it was never gonna happen, and I was like, I can't wait to be in my car and to
Yeah.
plug my phone in and to like have my podcast there. And then when it finally happened, I was just like, wow, this is. It felt like a dream come true,
It's such a
And it's
rush.
crazy because it's like I didn't have to go through any sort of interview process. I didn't have to No one gave me this opportunity. It's literally out for anyone to take. Like, make your own podcast if you want to, because I don't know. It was just awesome, and to know that like we just did it ourselves. No one handed us an opportunity. It's out there for anyone to take.
That's such a powerful point, because it's basically infinite leverage, and you didn't have to ask for any permission.
Yeah.
You
Like
just
no boss, you have total creative freedom.
Mhm.
It's
It's not like going
awesome.
on the radio where it's like, okay, Olivia, tell us what you did in
Right.
1995. Like, okay,
But
we're
don't
gonna
use
cut to
any curse
commercials.
words.
Yeah, we're gonna cut to commercials now, and thank you. It's like, okay, that sucked. That
And
was
they're
not
like, yeah, yeah, shut
what
the
I
fuck
wanted.
up. All right.
It's just gross. But a podcast, like we were talking about before we started recording, like we could go for hours. Like if you don't stop me, I could probably like chat with you for 3 or 4 hours just about podcasting
100%.
alone.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Because it's really, and the cool thing about it is like it really is just a conversation, and that's why we feel like we could be here for hours. Because if we were sitting on a couch together, yeah, we would be sitting here for hours talking. So it just so happens that it's being recorded, and we have to remember that other people are listening. But I think that's the cool thing about it is that a
yeah,
lot of people, a lot of our listeners will be like, I feel like I'm hanging out with my best friends, and we're like, yeah, you kind of are, like we're
yeah,
sitting here talking to you like we're close friends. I mean, we're pretty open and vulnerable about our personal lives and experiences.
yeah.
So there's something really cool about that level of, intimacy and vulnerability. It makes you feel so close with people.
That kind of brings me to my next question. Like, how do you think your podcast has helped you kind of deepen connections with your audience and with people who were riding with you from
Hmm.
before you started the podcast?
I think it's definitely like next level intimacy. An hour conversation about your life or your situations or topics, and every topic we relate our own stories to, is so much more. I mean, how do you compare that to an Instagram picture of me with a skincare brand? You just can't. They're two totally different things. So I was really excited starting the podcast. I still am. That didn't change. But like before we started, I was so excited to finally give this like really in just let people into like our world, and that we're real people, and that being influencers and the number of followers we have doesn't mean you and I are different. And I think like I think that that's starting to be more apparent. I think there's a new trend of influencers trying to be more relatable and trying to break down that barrier. But
Right.
definitely at first it was definitely this picture perfect, my life is perfect, I'm perfect, like goal. And I think now people are starting to like break down that wall a little bit. But I've the feedback we've gotten is so amazing because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, you and I are so different, but in so many ways I related to you. Like my story about how me and my fiance met, and our whole trial and tribulation story got such incredible response. And I think it's because, as different as all of our lives are, we all relate on such a deep level when it comes to relationships and love. So that was really, really cool to see and very fulfilling.
That's so powerful because that's literally like what I've branded my podcast as. It's like human beings are all fundamentally the same. Despite our differences, like I could talk to somebody, who's a billionaire CEO, to a doctor, to an athlete, an artist, an influencer, anybody.
Mm-hmm.
When you boil it down, if I have you and I could sit down and chat with you for an hour, we might not agree on everything. That's
Right.
fine. That's great. You might look different than me or subscribe to different kinds of ideologies and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you boil it down, we are all fundamentally the same. We all kind of want the same things: health, wealth, happiness, love, less suffering for ourselves and our family. Those kinds
Mm-hmm.
of things are just like you could go anywhere in the world, and for the most part, people are going to relate to that.
Yeah, and I think especially now more than ever, we realize that we really are more alike than we think, and no amount of money or beauty or power can, you know, can save anyone from being human. And a virus is apparently a part of being human, but no amount of beauty and wealth can get you the oxygen that you need on life support. Simple as that.
Uh, Absolutely, well put. I like that. Um, So kind of coming back to just like podcasting itself and how it's helped your brand, talk to me a little bit about the decision you guys made. And I guess it's like, now that I'm saying it out loud, it kind of makes a lot of sense for you guys to have made a separate Instagram account just for the Whiskey and Water podcast. But was that something that you guys had to like talk about? Was it like, are we gonna constantly promote this on our own social media things and then try to grow it from there? Like,
No, it was for sure, especially because we both understand Instagram so well. It was a no brainer. Just like, any company right now, if you start a hair care line, you create an Instagram page for the hair care line. It's just like
mhm,
something that brands have to consider nowadays because if you're not on social media, you're behind already. And you see that in a lot of like, companies that have been around forever trying to adjust to social media and trying to get hip on Instagram and hip on Twitter and TikTok.
it's so
So
cringe sometimes.
yeah, they
Yeah,
definitely they're like, where are those new graduates? Because we need them in ASAP.
yeah,
But yeah, that was a no brainer for sure because it's its own thing and it deserves its own space. We
right.
actually like as much as we usually promote on our stories the show, but as far as our in feed posts, I'll post a few snippets here and there, but I mean, it's almost separate because again, like working with brands and stuff, they are paying for something to go on my account, not on Whiskey and Water account. So it has to
Mhm.
be, separate entities.
And have you had any backlash from any brands, being so open and having a podcast that's literally named Whiskey and Water? Like, to me, I get it, like, and a lot of your fans and people get it and like love it, ride with it. But if you're someone, some suit in a marketing, uh, you know, boardroom,
Hmm.
like, what's Olivia up to over here? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what's going on. She's being pretty open about these aspects of her life.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because actually this week, for the first time ever, a brand that I was like kind of going back and forth with emails about mentioned that her boss is very like anti-alcohol. So she was like, "My only concern is the podcast and that it's named this." And she was like, "I love the cursing and the raunchiness, but I'm just saying." So that's so interesting you say that, but it doesn't seem to be a huge issue, especially since we do keep the two separate. I'm not posting too much about it. And when I do, it's I try to not post like the raunchy stuff on my personal profile because that's not necessarily a part of my personal brand, but it
Right.
is a part of the Whiskey and Water brand because the whiskey side is like raunchy and funny and we talk about sex here and there. So that's a part of that branding, but mine, I usually only post snippets or bits that are about personal development because that is more about my personal brand. Um, so I haven't luckily received too much like pushback from brands.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
if a brand want to work with us for the podcast specifically, they would definitely have to be, you know,
Cool.
something that aligned with what we talk about and the things we represent.
Interesting. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. I like how you guys have kind of gone about it from day one, having the logo, the branding, the you guys got merch. You guys got like like, I like the equipment that you guys use. I think you have like the little table set up,
Mhm.
and like you got the good microphones and everything's all like, it's like really professionally done, even though
Thanks.
it's in an apartment, right?
Yeah, it
Which
is.
is like the beautiful thing, because I do mine like out of my apartment too, and like
Mhm.
I know that future me is gonna look back when I have like, when my podcast has grown a bit bigger and when I'm doing, probably some bigger, better things.
Mhm.
um this is these are the humble beginnings. This is
Right.
my little pad, but I love the way you guys have gone about it, and like it's on point. I encourage anyone like listening to this to go check it out live. It's Whiskey and Water podcast
Yeah,
on
Whiskey
Instagram.
and Water podcast.
Boom.
Yep.
And
Thank
people can
you.
find it all from
Appreciate
there.
that.
No, I
We've had to make a lot of adjustments.
oh
And
yeah.
we kind of realized early on like that we were going like a little too hard. We're like, okay, we do not need to be like doing this much because think about an hour of high quality footage. At first, we were doing 2 camera angles. No, at first, we were doing 3 camera angles. So we've definitely like refined our system and our workflow a lot.
Right.
um there's just bumps in the road we had to learn ourselves, but we at the end of the day we had to think like, okay, how can we make this sustainable? Because if we
Hmm.
keep trying to do this many deliverables, this much content, this many camera angles, it's just it's not going to be sustainable. Because we at first, Jess and I were investing like out of pocket for the gear. We were paying our producer Zach. He actually ended up coming in as a third partner, so this is just a passion project for him now. And then we pay our editor. So until we get this thing like really up and big, it's a passion project for now, and we are being paid in fulfillment. That's how we
Right.
see it, because that's honestly priceless for us. And it's not something that I thought at this point I would be like, yeah, sure, it's fine. But like, here I am, and I'm like, absolutely, this is worth it.
Well, I think it speaks a lot to the nature of the podcasting space right now as well. People often say like, "Oh my god, there's so much competition. There's so many podcasts out there." But I still see that it's in its infancy. But if you're getting into podcasting right now to try to make a quick buck, or think that, overnight you're going to be, raking in thousands of dollars
Yeah,
from
no.
ads, that, like, I'm sorry to
I
burst your
wish.
bubble,
I
that
wish.
it ain't it. But to, like, on that point though, it is a very long term game. So
Yeah.
I I think you brought up a very important point, is the sustainability of, what kind of effort you can put in. And for me, like, that's been difficult because I'm basically a one man show, and I got my
Mm-hmm.
editor, who is also my younger brother. Shout out to young Sal.
Shout
Um,
out.
but like scaling it back and like having to make those kind of creative decisions sometimes, like, okay, well, you know what, maybe I can't chop up this many clips for a week, or,
Right.
maybe the two, I have only 2 camera angles, I'm not balling like you guys over here, but
No, we
like,
only do one now.
yeah, exactly, but like,
We only do one.
yeah, but I think I'm gonna have to get to just doing one as well, because it takes time to go and change the angle and then do this and this
Yeah.
editing and that editing. It's like,
I mean, the amount of hours our producer, because before we got our editor, our producer was also editing. So the amount of hours and nights that he spent just like hitting his head against the wall, trying to figure out how he's going to get these massive files to render in his software program. Like, his computer his laptop took a shit on him. He had to buy a whole new desktop. Like, we
oh
put
my
him through
god.
the ringer, man. And shout out Zach, you a real one.
Shout out
But
Zach, man.
yeah, we call him PD in our early episodes. We called him
TD.
our PD, our podcast daddy.
I love that. I love that.
But yeah, we've made so many adjustments, and I think if anyone's listening who wants to start their own podcast, just know it's going to be a learning curve. Your things are going to change. I mean, I would never like if I saw what we're doing now when we started, I would have been like, how did you get there? But it's just from learning and evolving and being like, okay, this isn't working, pivot. This isn't working either, pivot. Okay, this works, but that could be better, pivot. That's all it is.
COVID pandemic comes around and you can't do in-person interviews anymore, pivot. Like,
Pivot,
yo,
like
you gotta do what you gotta
that's
do.
what it
Yeah,
is. That's
it's
what it
all adjusting.
is.
And
Yeah.
we, like, for people who don't know, like, we did a test call earlier today to make sure, and I'm still like low key got my fingers crossed that this is actually recording and
No,
working.
you're good. You're good. You're good. I see it. It's recording. I've,
Okay,
I've
okay.
actually checked a few times because that's the podcaster in me.
No, I have two. I'm just like, I'm trying not to make it too obvious, but it's like, these are things that, as a podcaster, and just as, like, not even just a podcaster, just a content creator in general, you
Mm-hmm.
you're playing, you're doing so many things. You're not just focused on just showing up and just talking into a mic,
Yeah.
which is honestly like naively what I thought podcasting was when I wanted to get into it. I'm like, how hard can it be? Like, you set up a couple cameras, like,
Yeah.
YouTube, piece of cake. YouTube's been like the hardest thing for me to figure out, because it's like, if you only look at vanity metrics like views and subscribers and that kind of stuff, people, quite frankly, aren't just going to sit there for an hour if they
An
don't know
hour.
you or
We've
ride with
been
your brand.
That's been a question for this entire journey. We're like, do we keep doing YouTube shows, or because there's a small percentage of people who like love watching an hour of
Right?
the episode, and it's like, okay,
You're not just
but
going to abandon them. I know. Like, I
I
had the
know
exact same
it's tough
situation. But I think it comes back to the long term game, right? When you
yeah
look back 5 years from now, I think, and like this isn't me telling you have to stick to YouTube. Like I can't tell you what to do, but I think that looking back at it, you'll be more happy that you stuck through it, even though it was only getting like the 100 or
for
whatever
sure.
many views. I don't know how many you guys get, definitely more than mine, but like not a ridiculous amount. Like it's just it is what
Well,
it is, right?
our thing is that we're recording it anyways for Instagram snippets, just because that is like really valuable content to have on our page. Are those clips? So we're like, well, we're recording it anyways. You might as well just throw it up on YouTube and call it a day.
It's crazy how similar like our
Yeah,
philosophy is on the podcast. Like that's exactly my thinking. It's like, well, it's already being recorded. I already got the
yeah.
cameras
Just a
and
few
did
more
all this
extra
stuff.
steps.
Yeah, so you might as well put it up there. But then, do you ever notice, and this is kind of like another question, but it's like, do you ever notice that sometimes there are just too many things to do? Like they're just like, oh, like I like if you want to grow on YouTube, you gotta then chop up the clips into smaller like bite-sized clips for people to like get
Yeah.
the clips of your podcast
So
or
we experimented with that too. We've experimented with a lot. But we were doing separate Instagram clips, separate YouTube clips, and then we saw the YouTube clips were getting like 7 views, and we were like, why are we doing
yeah, I
We've been
feel
through
you.
a lot. Yeah, so we eventually just stopped the clips and we still do the full episode, but we actually recently hired an assistant. And
Ooh.
yeah, that was a level up for sure. We had been talking about it for like 6 months and trying to get people and it not working out and wondering if we actually need one. But we got one. She's in the Philippines, so she's a virtual assistant. And she has really helped with those kind of just like back
Nagging little
burner.
tasks.
Yeah, the back burner tasks that we like haven't gotten to or are just kind of like tedious. So she's really helped in that aspect, and that has, that was a conversation we had to have of like, is it worth our investment so that we can be purely the creators here and just create quality content? And for us it was. So it's so far so good, and we're
I've been
enjoying
thinking about
having.
that too. I've been thinking
Yeah.
about that too. I
Yeah.
think I'm getting to the point in my journey in my like
Mhm.
just being the one man army doing all these things on
Props to
top of
you. Props to you. You kill
thank you.
it. Honestly, seriously, like you kill it for being a
Uh,
one man show.
I appreciate it.
Kudos.
But I don't know if I could do this much longer. We talk about
You're like,
sustainability.
thanks, but I'm dying.
Thanks, but yo, like I love putting out the podcast. I love, the feedback I get from people. I love just
hmm
creating for the sake of creating. But there are just tasks, and you obviously relate to this. There's like, yo, this I am not bringing any additional value by doing this. I need to
Yeah,
outsource
but
this
it has to be
immediately.
done though, right? It just has to be
Yeah,
done. So you're like, I've
hundred
got to do
percent.
it.
I might holla at your VA. Like
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
I think it's time.
I will
But
connect you. It's a level up for sure.
awesome. I love that. Kind of switching gears a bit. We've been talking for the pod about the podcast a little while. That's on me. I get
I,
so into the
Me too.
podcasting
I'm
thing.
so here for it. It's okay. I'm here for it.
We could do like a whole other podcast just on like why we love podcasting, and
Yep.
I'm sure we probably will too.
Yep.
But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the other things you're passionate about as well. Real estate is something that you talk about. You wanting to be a real estate investor, and I've been following you on Instagram for a while now, and I noticed that you and your fiance did a whole renovation of a apartment. Like, is it what is it?
It is a duplex. I'm not
A
sure if you guys have
duplex.
those in
Yeah,
Canada.
yeah,
You
yeah.
do?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they two-story or one-story?
Two-story,
Okay, so
right?
duplexes in Florida are one-story,
Oh, okay, yeah. Florida
but
is
like
like a whole different
everywhere else,
place.
they're two.
Right, right, right. Okay,
It's
makes
weird.
sense. But yeah, so like you clearly have like this interest in real estate. You talked about consuming real estate podcasts in the past. What like kind of sparked your interest for the real estate world?
Yeah, so it was actually a few years ago. My fiance and I, at the time, he was my boyfriend, but we had gotten our first place together as a rental, and he was looking into getting into being a real estate agent. So, because he has some family who is really successful and they own like they're brokers. So he wanted to get his license, and I saw an ad come up for this free training in Miami, and I was like, "Oh, okay, sounds cool. Free 2 hour class, learn something." So we went, and then they convinced us into like a weekend training. It was like $150. So I was like, you know what? What do we have to lose? And it was all about real estate investing. And then so those 3 days happened. We did the training. We learned a lot, and we were just like, wow. It kind of just that's what really are you hearing my email?
Yeah. No.
No, you're good? Or you hear
Mhm.
it?
No, I don't hear anything.
Okay, great. Sorry.
All good.
I was like, no. Um, so that's what opened our eyes to like this world of real estate investing and just how much of a great opportunity is. And then on the third day, they try selling us on like this $70,000 program, and I was like, "This seems sketchy." I did some research. I found this resource, Bigger Pockets. They have like a whole blog, podcast, and I just started binging on their podcast, and I learned so much. I would drive to work
Right.
every day, listening to podcasts, driving to my corporate job, just consuming this knowledge. Like, literally learned more in that year than I have in like school ever. That's a whole other
I say
discussion.
that a lot. Trust me, I say that a
Yeah,
lot.
it's a whole other discussion. So that's like kind of what got our interest. And then kind of just reading, like listening and reading more, I just saw what an opportunity it was to one, make passive income, which who doesn't want that? To have control over my financial future. Also, who doesn't want that? And three, kind of just thinking like long term. It helps that I've been in a long term relationship, so it's easier for my mind
Right.
to think in that time frame, and like make decisions based on that. But it was really just like thinking about generational wealth and financial freedom and wanting to say like, oh yeah, I own 200 rental units and I decide when I work and I work from home and I manage a team of 30 people. Like that is like, yes, that just is everything I want. And in by giving myself financial freedom in that way, I would love to have passion projects on the side, like a podcast or programs
Mhm.
and things that like really like feed my soul and fuel my soul. So that's kind of the long term goal I have for myself. But I kind of realized like I don't want to be doing Instagram. Who knows how much longer Instagram will ever be even be around if when I'm 40. I don't know if it's still going to be there. But if it is, I don't want to be doing influencing until I'm 40, like
Mhm.
I had to take these things into consideration when you consider having an influencing career. So,
Absolutely.
the real estate thing is kind of like my long-term plan.
That's no, that's really powerful, and I think that's something a lot of millennials hear about, and it's like it would be cool, and it seems like
Mhm.
something like, oh, I'd love to learn more about that, but like it's very much for a lot of people, it seems super out of reach, but
Yeah, like
I do.
unattainable.
Exactly, but I do think that if you make that a priority like you kind of have, you can reverse engineer your life
Totally.
and get to actually doing that, and it's actually
Totally.
a lot more attainable if that's something you want to do, like
Right.
than people think. And
Mhm.
it's taking that step to first kind of educate yourself about it and not just like dive head first into something just because it sounds cool, like, oh
Right.
yeah, I'd love to be a real estate investor, like, oh yeah, I think I could like be a landlord with like four or
Yeah.
five different houses, like, there's also something called like being over leveraged and like
Yeah, for sure.
all these different things, but I think it's really cool that you took the steps to kind of like take control
Make
of
it
your learning
happen.
and make it happen. And I also like what you said about, like, not wanting to just rely on Instagram. Like, I heard, like, I think I had somebody on my podcast say, um would you give Mark Zuckerberg the keys to your house? No. So why would you, again, put all your eggs in one basket?
Totally.
So I think that's really powerful, and I like how you've kind of, you got your hands in a lot of different kind of areas, and I'm really excited to see, like, what's next and watch you grow, throughout your journey as well, because it inspires me as well, and that's why I
Aw,
really wanted to
thank
have you on the
you.
podcast and just chat, right?
Thanks. I
I think
appreciate that. It really means a lot.
no, like, I genuinely mean it. Like, I think, um being a podcaster is a weird thing because you're in this space where you're you are quite literally just talking.
Mhm.
I kind of compare it to, like, hiking, right? Some people
Mhm.
get, like, super, like, passionate about hiking, and I'm like, I could be one of them. Like, I love going for a hike, right? But when you boil it down, it is really just walking, right?
Yep.
But there's so much more to it, and there's so many benefits around it, and podcasting is one of the many avenues that you've been exploring to kind of
Yeah.
give yourself more of a voice and
Yeah.
building your own influence for your own audience. And so, kind of like, I know we're kind of running over time here already, but kind of how I want to, like, end this off, and I know we're going to do many more podcasts in the future, but I want to just talk about, um, what's next for Olivia. Like, what is, like, the next thing that you're pursuing, and, like, the next big project, the big thing that you want to, like, achieve.
So, what is next? I don't know. I didn't prepare for this question. I would say just, I mean, I'm always trying to grow, whether it be like, emotionally, spiritually, in any ways I can. I have Thrive tattooed on me. It's the one tattoo I have. And I got it when I was like, I think I was 18. I'm 24 now for reference. And I think it's just something I want to like live by forever. Just thrive, grow in
Right.
every way you can. What makes you uncomfortable is your biggest opportunity for growth. Do things that are out of your comfort zone. If we don't push ourselves beyond those self-limiting beliefs, nothing will never amount to anything. And like things like the podcast would have never happened, and modeling wouldn't have happened for me, and putting myself out there on Instagram. So it's like when you push yourself outside of those boundaries you think you've set for yourself, really amazing things happen. So I'm just going to continue to do that and take opportunities as they come. Definitely want to get a new real estate investing deal under my belt for sure. My fiance and I got engaged in November, and everyone's like, "When's the wedding?" I'm like, "I think I want to buy a few more properties before the wedding." Honestly, I don't
Yeah,
know. That's just where my head's at right now. We're not in a rush, and that's kind of priority. So really building a future is important for me while also balancing living in the present moment and, not getting lost in the future or the past. And as far as projects, the podcast is just going to keep hopefully getting bigger and better and
it will.
reach more people. That's definitely a big goal, is to get that to blow up, because you could have an amazing show, but if no one's hearing it, it doesn't really matter. So definitely want to get that out to more ears, and kind of just taking it day by day. Hopefully we're out of this strange time soon, and we can
Yeah,
be together and with other people. And I think that this is going to change us for the better. It's going to make us appreciate human connection and contact way more.
1,000%.
um and yeah, I'm just taking it day by day, taking opportunities as they come.
I love it. Getting past your self-limiting beliefs. I think we all have that little voice in our head telling us these
Oh, totally.
stories, and, holding ourselves back from doing a lot of things. You mentioned a lot of amazing mindset stuff. Kind of just to close out the podcast before I do my quick little lightning round thing. I noticed that you were doing this thing back in the summer, and I don't want to, like, call you out or anything,
Oh
but I was
god.
like, it was like you were doing these no social Sundays.
Oh
I'm not
yes,
sure if you still do this.
I
I'm
do.
not sure if you still do that, but I thought that was really cool. And I just wanted to quickly, like, for the listeners, talk about the value of like unplugging from the material world a little bit. Talk to me about why you do that and why you still do it.
Yeah, for sure. I love that you brought this up. This is like one of my favorite subjects. Um, I realized a few years ago the attachment that I had to my phone and the relationship I had. And it felt quite literally like I had strings attached to my phone and I had anxiety when I was without it. I couldn't go, I didn't want to go into a room. I didn't want to go anywhere without it. And I recognized that and I was like, this is fucking crazy. Like, this is not normal. And for our society to make it seem like it's normal, it's just not. It's not for human nature. We're not built that way. We're not robots, We don't value like technology that way yet. Maybe things will change. Evolution, who knows? But so I noticed this uncomfortable relationship that I had, and then I actually saw a brand. It was like I think it was like a protein shake brand or something. They posted something that was like hashtag no social Sunday, and it showed them like what they were going to do instead of being on their phones. And that's what like really sparked it. And I was like, oh my God, yes, that's it. That's my solution. That's what I'm going to do. So I started doing them. And at first it was really hard because like, it's so
Yeah.
unnatural for us to not be on our phones now. And then
Well, it's
after,
also like literally your job.
yes, and that's another great point you make is like, especially being in the influencer space and it being work, it can get really hard to draw that line, that boundary of like, oh, but I'm working or I'm just scrolling for pleasure. So the no social Sundays have been so good for my mental health and like set the tone for my week on Mondays and really just like getting back to like normal life. Like when we were, how old are you?
I'm 24.
Oh, duh, what up? 95?
95.
Let's go. So, like, I had a razor in like fifth grade. So, like, we kind of knew a time before iPhones and
Oh
before
yeah.
this like addiction.
Hmm.
And it kind of just like not having my phone on Sundays kind of just brings me back to that time of like normal.
Right.
To me, it's like that's what our normal should be. So,
Damn.
that's been really great. And yeah, like, definitely um detoxing. I think of it as detoxing. I mean, that's kind of
Right.
what it is. Device detoxing, um social media detoxing. It's really good because we're just constantly feeding ourselves these images and constantly like inputting all this
Dopamine hits.
information, and yeah, and comparing ourselves, especially like, I'm sure you do, but women are especially bad at just comparing ourselves to everyone we follow and things we see and
Yeah.
lives they live and jobs. And it's
Thousand
just
percent.
nice to put that away for a day and just live your life without it.
I
So
love that.
I
That's super
encourage
powerful.
you to join me Sunday. I encourage anyone to listening to join me on Sundays. It's really like, it's such a great practice, and it's really hard at first. It's
Right.
really hard. It is. And it makes you realize how much we go on it and how much we check it, because you'll be on it and you're like, oh shit. Or you'll go to reach for it and you're like, oh shit. But then once you do it a few times in a row, it gets easier.
I love those kinds of challenges that like take you out of a frame of what is normal.
Mm-hmm.
I
Totally.
love that. This
Do
has
it.
been
I like
such
to
an
challenge
incredible.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been like such an incredible podcast. I'm sure we could go for hours.
We could.
Like we talked about, we
I know,
already
it's
like
so bad.
it just happens, man. It's just how
It
it
does.
goes. But I loved having you on. Let's jump into our lightning round to end it off.
Let's do it.
Basically just 5 questions. You
I'll
kind
make
of
them
know the
fast.
drill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I want your fiance to start making dinner too, right?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, all right, getting hungry.
What's one common misconception of being an influencer that you'd want to dispel? Because I know it's a lot harder than the photos just make it seem. Like you got
Mm-hmm.
to get up early and do these shoots, and the travel can weigh on you. But what's like one of the biggest misconceptions?
I would say that it's just as simple as taking a photo, because there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. I guess like waking up early or taking a photo, but really it's about like how we see this as our own personal business. It's a small business. We're entrepreneurs. We see it that way. I'm constantly in negotiation with brands. I do brand outreach every Monday. Like it's a small business that I'm running ultimately. So I think that is definitely the biggest misconception.
Love it. What's one piece of advice you'd give 17-year-old you?
Ooh, these are good. I would say don't sweat them, sis.
Boom,
don't sweat the boys, specifically.
I love it. Yeah. What's your favorite podcast to listen to other than your own?
Do you listen to your own episodes? Just out of curiosity. You don't?
No.
I like sometimes I do, but most of the times I don't.
I'll listen to it like little bits and pieces to try to find like a fire clip or something like that. And like I forced myself to listen to like half of one once, like sitting there with my mom and dad, like they're all like never again. They're all like super proud and like, oh my god, like you got so a doctor, cringy. Like this is so awesome, like yeah. And it's just like, oh, why did I ask that? Why did I interrupt this person? Why did I say like so much? All those like little things, right? But I know they say you're supposed to listen to it to get better. It's like watching game film as an athlete.
At first, I was listening to them all the time. I like after every episode, I would listen, and now I'm kind of just like, meh. I'm just gonna leave that there.
It's out there, whatever.
I love a podcast called Girls Gotta Eat. It's these two comedian women in their 30s. They are just so funny. They're just hilarious.
I've heard of this one.
Yes.
What superhero would you be? It's a weird question. I don't know.
That is weird. I actually don't. I'm not like a big Marvel gal, so I don't even know.
I'm not even a big superhero watching dude. I don't know why that's there.
I can't even name 5 superheroes.
I needed a question. I was like, what do I just come up with one. Let's wrap this up.
Spider-Woman.
Boom. Love it.
There you go. I don't even know what that's saying.
Last and final question. How would you like to be remembered?
These are deep. You said it wasn't that deep, and you got deep. I think just bringing positivity to everyone around me.
Boom.
And being a light and positive influence to friends, family, followers, listeners, etc.
I think you will absolutely do that and continue to inspire. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Shout out your social media for people who are listening this far,
for sure.
So they can find you.
So Instagram is at Olivia PW, like password PW. And then our podcast is Whiskey and Water Podcast. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And just remember, it's not that deep.
It is not that deep, but sometimes.
Sometimes it is that deep. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one.